granniopteryx, granniopteryx. She knows the truth, she's linking every link.
Hello, I came across this video. The video is titled "How a Mossad Sniper Shot a Hamas Banker Hiding Among 70,000 Fans at the World Cup." And, you know, it seemed like quite an interesting story, so I was watching it. And a stray comment that the narrator made caught my attention, and so now I'm passing it on to you. So look, there might be copyright on this video, so I'm going to kill the sound and I'll read out what the narrator says, and I'll hope for the best. Now, he describes a Hamas banker who was very little known to anyone else outside his immediate circle. He was called Ibrahim Alzarani, and he had a very low profile. So here, he was, in the formal intelligence sense of the word, it says here, a facilitator, the kind of operational figure whose value lies precisely in the fact that his name means nothing. By the way, all this video stuff, it's merely for illustration. Obviously, these aren't the people that the narrator is talking about. He was known only to this narrow circle of people, and nobody named him by name. His function within Hamas was financial. Specifically, he managed the movement of money, it says here, from donor networks in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, through a layered series of charitable organisations. And that caught my attention. Charitable organisations. Now, according to this, just to fill in the story, he was a big football fan, and that's when the Mossad saw its chance. The story is, and remember, that's just the one for public consumption. But anyway, the story is that an agent at Mossad headquarters who'd been watching him, that was her brief, she flagged up a bank transaction which she thought might indicate that Alzarani was going to be at the World Cup final in Berlin. I think this was 2006. It's quite a while back. Look, I don't know whether he was an active murderer as well, but certainly his genius appears to be, at least from this story, that he moved money around. And as you see, through a layered series of charitable organisations, and that caught my attention. In other words, he was using charities to finance Hamas's various operations. A bit later on, the narrator says that Alzarani said the way to disguise financial transfers was to disguise the fact that they were actually money. By that, I suppose he meant big money. And what he did was shift currency not in thousands of dollars or reals or whatever, but in small amounts that looked like charitable donations from small donors. But eventually all this money would pool into plenty of funds to run Hamas, to pay their operatives and to buy the materiel. And I thought immediately of what's been happening both in the UK and in America, and I suppose in other places too, to do with charities and Muslim political ambitions. You chaps in the United States will be very familiar with the Somali childcare scandal. For those of you who might not have heard of it, it seems millions of dollars in US government subsidies intended for the funding of childcare facilities in the Minneapolis area, where there's a large Somali population, were instead, all this money was supposed to go to childcare facilities, and it was instead diverted either into the pockets of corrupt administrators, administrators of those facilities, or even more disturbingly, the money was being sent back to Somalia to fund Islamist factions there. In other words, there was a large-scale operation by Somali bogus charities set up to take advantage of the American impulse to be charitable to displaced persons and their families. I mean, what could be more altruistic than the education and good care of displaced children? Except, of course, this wasn't going to children. Then there was the video I made quite recently talking about Iranian charities in the USA, which were apparently siphoning off funds to Iranian Islamist causes. And I found this document issued by the Association of Certified Financial Crime Specialists, in which they say, in this primer story, we will shed light on how Iran channels funds to these blacklisted entities, they're talking about things like Hamas, detailing their methods, red flags and transactional alerts for fin crime compliance officers, federal investigators and terror finance analysts, pulled from just released congressional reports and testimonies, government alerts and ACFCS webinars and events. So quite comprehensive rundown of the sort of misuse of charities that apparently starts in this case, at least in Iran, not Somalia. That's a completely different thing, but it's out of the same cultural idea, I'm sorry to say, a Muslim idea that the West is for a place for looting. And if they have to use charities to do that, then they will use charities. And all of this here looks eerily similar to the conclusions of a report here in the UK, the Walney report. I made a whole video about it. And Lord Walney catalogues the number of Iranian-associated charities in Britain. I remember he named about 30 of these charities, and 10 of them are on the MI5 watch list because it seems they appear to be directly owing their allegiance or getting their orders from Iran. And I have to be careful here, of course. Perhaps they are not using funds for the good of this country. So, when I saw this video here, it struck me that there doesn't seem to be one single social impulse that the West has for good and tolerance that is not being taken advantage of by some Muslim organisations determined on overcoming and subsuming the West. Now, possibly Iran is doing most of this, but then again, the Somalis are not connected directly to Iran. But in this case, Iran appears to be funding this. I mean, Hamas certainly had a lot to do with Iran, and Hamas are masters of using our Western sensibilities against ourselves. We know that. They were using hospitals and schools to cite military facilities, weren't they? And then acting all shocked when Israel bombed them. And there is, here, just a minute, I have drone footage of Hamas using ambulances to transport terrorists. And, look, there it is. What more humane and humanitarian system could we have than an ambulance? And Hamas take advantage of that. To return to the USA, Somali organisations were taking advantage of the American people's thoroughly decent impulse to educate children, while in Britain almost all the charities named in the Walney report are to do with education. It looks like absolutely every decent impulse of our society is being used by certain Muslim organisations to our detriment. And they're using our own generosity either. I mean, there are many people who give personal donations, but then there's a whole lot of government handouts as well that are being used to destroy us. And it's absolutely sickening, not only because it's a betrayal of trust, but also because it breaks down our own community cohesion. If we know about this, which obviously these things leak out eventually, it will stop us from trusting each other, never mind the Muslim charities. Mind you, a lack of social trust, low trust societies is basically how a lot of Muslim societies operate. And look at where they are. You can't operate a successful society if it's low trust. And all of this sort of thing is turning us into a low trust society. As I said, it's just sickening. I'm sorry. At this point, I've just run out of words. And, well, it takes quite a lot to leave me speechless, doesn't it? Anyway, yeah, well, that's it. The dangers of being socially generous, I suppose. Till next time. You can help my channel by subscribing and clicking the notification bell. That's quite important. And by sharing if you're so inclined. Links to my other channels and to donation methods are in the description. But the best way you can help is simply by clicking like and notify. Thank you.